The smell hit David Walsh the moment he entered the central dining concourse. Sterile. Everything smelled sterile, like a hospital corridor stretched across an entire deck of the trade station. No garlic, no species, no warmth, just recycled air and the faint chemical tang of sanitizer. He carried the container carefully, aware of the eyes tracking his movement. Dozens of alien species filled the massive hall, their attention fixed on the human delegation's arrival. This was supposed to be a gesture of friendship. Share a meal, build trust, sign trade agreements. Standard diplomatic procedure across the galaxy. David set the container on the designated table. Ambassador Trell approached, her insectoid features unreadable behind the translator mask. The Voscarite stood nearly 8 feet tall, her exoskeleton gleaming under the station's lights. You bring food. Trell's voice carried skepticism even through the mechanical translation. We have adequate nutrition available. Cultural exchange, David explained. On Earth, sharing meals brings people together. Coordinator Shiva drifted closer, her aquatic form visible through the environmental suit. All food items must pass contamination scans. Protocol requires it. David nodded and stepped back. He watched the scanner pass over the container, watched the readout display on the public screens. Within seconds, warning lights flashed red across every monitor in the hall. The room went silent. Bacterial contamination detected, Shiva announced, her suit's speakers amplifying her concern. Active colonies present. Multiple strains identified. Trell's mandibles clicked together sharply. You brought diseased food to a diplomatic function. It's not diseased, David said quickly. These are fermented foods. Yogurt, pickled vegetables, sourdough bread. They're supposed to have bacteria. The reaction was immediate. Aliens near the table backed away. Several species activated personal shields. One delegate actually left the hall entirely. Supposed to? Trell leaned forward, her shadow falling across David. You intentionally cultivate bacterial infections in your nutrition? Dr. Yuki Tanaka stepped forward from the human delegation. The bacteria are beneficial. They aid digestion, provide nutrients, strengthen immune systems. A Metherian scientist pulled up holographic displays. This violates Galactic Standard 7 Alpha. No consumable material may contain living organisms. The risk of cross-species contamination is unacceptable. But these specific bacteria are safe, Yuki insisted. Humans have consumed fermented foods for thousands of years. Trell gestured to her own display. Our species eliminated internal bacteria 6,000 cycles ago. We engineered digestive systems that require no microbial assistance. Clean, efficient, safe. She turned to address the room. Every civilized species has done the same. Heads nodded across the hall. An elderly Palaxian trader spoke up. Our food is grown in sealed vats. Pure proteins, synthesized nutrients. Nothing lives in it. Nothing can contaminate it. We consume photonic energy, added a crystalline being for the far side of the room. No biological matter at all. David felt the situation slipping away. He looked at the container of Earth foods. Foods he'd carefully selected to represent human culture. Kimchi his grandmother made. Aged cheddar from a family farm in Vermont. Sourdough starter that was older than he was. All of it useless now. Worse than useless. Threatening. I understand this seems strange, David said, keeping his voice steady. But on Earth, we've learned to work with bacteria instead of against them. Not all microorganisms are dangerous. Trell pulled up medical records. 17 species present at this station have zero tolerance for bacterial exposure. Their genetic modifications make them vulnerable to any microbial presence. Your food could literally kill them. The weight of that statement settled over David. He hadn't considered that angle. Earth's relationship with bacteria was so fundamental to human biology that he'd never imagined species that had completely divorced themselves from microbial life. The food will be destroyed, Shiva declared. Incinerated according to biohazard protocols. Wait, David held up a hand. Give me 24 hours. For what purpose? Trell demanded. To prove these foods aren't hazardous. To show you that controlled bacterial cultivation is safe, even valuable. Trell's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. You cannot prove safety when the very presence of living organisms defines the danger. 24 hours, David repeated. If I can't demonstrate the value and safety of these foods, I'll incinerate them myself, and Earth will adopt Galactic Standard 7 Alpha for all future trade. The room buzzed with conversation. Translators struggled to keep up with dozens of species debating simultaneously. Finally, Shiva spoke. The human delegation will be confined to quarters under medical observation. No food items leave containment. You have one rotation of this station to make your case. David nodded. It wasn't much time, but it was something to as the crowd dispersed. Yuki approached him quietly. What are you planning? I brought something special, David said. Something that might change their minds. The fermented foods didn't work. I know. David smiled slightly. But I didn't show them the cheese yet. Yuki's eyes widened. You brought cheese? David, that's even worse. Intentionally molded food. Exactly. David watched Trell disappear down a corridor, her posture radiating satisfaction at the human's failure. They think bacteria are the enemy. Wait until they see what we can create when we make bacteria our partners. He followed the security escort back to the human quarters, already composing the message he needed to send to Earth. The station allowed one rotation, one chance to prove that humanity's relationship with the invisible world of microbes wasn't primitive barbarism, that IT was art. It was science. It was culture. And he had the perfect example waiting in cold storage back home. 3 hours after the diplomatic disaster, alarms screamed through the research wing. David jerked awake in his quarters, heart pounding. Red emergency lights painted the walls. All personnel evacuate Section 7, a mechanical voice announced. Biological contamination detected. Quarantine protocols active. Section 7. That was where they'd stored the human food supplies. David pulled on his uniform and rushed into the corridor. Security barriers had already descended, sealing off entire sections of the station. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he could see hazmat teams surrounding the storage area like it was ground zero for a plague outbreak. Yuki met him at the barrier. They found the backup supplies. The bioscanners went into full alert. It's just food, David said, but his confidence was fading. Not to them. Within the hour, David and Yuki stood before the Emergency Health Committee in a sealed conference room. The committee members sat behind a curved table, each in their own environmental isolation unit. They weren't taking chances. Doctor Nira, a Keltorian microbiologist, pulled up the scanner results. Her species had 4 eyes, all of them currently fixed on the humans with scientific intensity. Your storage container holds over 200 distinct bacterial strains. Some samples show millions of organisms per cubic centimeter. Those levels are normal for fermented foods, Yuki explained. Beneficial bacteria that aid human digestion. A murmur ran through the committee. Trell, present as an observer, stood up. You admit to deliberately cultivating millions of infectious agents. They're not infectious, David said. They're symbiotic. Nira projected microscopic images onto the main screen. Blue-veined cheese filled the display, the mold clearly visible. This is Penicillium roqueforti, a fungus. You grow it inside food, then consume it. The committee members recoiled. One delegate made a gesture that the translator couldn't parse, but clearly meant disgust. Humans evolved with bacteria. Yuki tried again. Our bodies contain trillions of microorganisms. They help us digest food, produce vitamins, protect against harmful pathogens. Impossible, said the Palaxian health minister. Our species purged all internal bacteria 4 millennia ago. We function perfectly without such contamination. All advanced species have done the same, added another voice. Genetic modification eliminated the need for parasitic relationships with microbes. David felt the ground shifting beneath him. He'd assumed bacteria were universal, that every species must have some microbial ecosystem. He'd been completely wrong. Trell activated another display. Let me show you why we eliminated bacteria. The screen filled with historical images. Plagues, epidemics, mass death events. Before we achieved sterility, microorganisms killed billions across the galaxy. They mutated, adapted, destroyed entire colonies. Species after species shared similar stories. The Metharians had nearly gone extinct from a bacterial infection that evolved too quickly for their medicine to counter. The Voskerites lost their original homeworld to contamination. The Keltorians still had memorials to the Great Purge when they finally engineered bacteria out of their biology entirely. We learned, Trell continued, that the only safe microorganism is a dead one. David understood now. These species hadn't just moved past bacteria. They'd survived microbial apocalypses. To them, his yogurt and pickles weren't food. They were weapons. The contaminated materials must be destroyed, the committee chairman declared. Immediate incineration. Wait, David said. Please, give me a chance to prove these specific bacteria are safe. Prove it how? Nira asked. You cannot guarantee containment. One mutation, one unexpected interaction with our biology, and you risk this entire station. I can show you that humans have controlled these organisms for thousands of years, that we've developed safety protocols, testing methods, quality standards. Trell's mandibles clicked. Your standards mean nothing. You're asking us to accept danger because you've grown comfortable with it. She wasn't wrong. David knew that, but she wasn't entirely right either. Not comfortable, he said quietly. Integrated. Bacteria aren't separate from human biology. They're part of it. We've spent our entire evolutionary history learning to distinguish helpful bacteria from harmful ones. And you still fail. Trell shot back. Your own medical records show thousands dying annually from foodborne illness, bacterial infections, fungal diseases. You haven't mastered these organisms. You've simply accepted casualties. The committee murmured agreement. David felt Yuki tense beside him. It's true we face risks, David admitted. But those risks come with benefits. Our immune systems learn and adapt because they encounter bacteria. Our gut produces neurochemicals because bacteria live there. We've discovered antibiotics, probiotics, entire fields of medicine because we understand microbial life. We have those discoveries too, Nira said. We study bacteria in isolated laboratories. We don't eat them. David pulled out his personal tablet. Then let me ask you something. Do any of your species suffer from autoimmune disorders? Allergies? Digestive issues that can't be explained? Silence fell across the committee. Several members shifted uncomfortably. The Keltorians have seen a rise in inflammatory conditions, Nira said slowly. Since the genetic modifications, we've never determined the cause. Palaxians experience similar problems, another delegate admitted. Our medical community believes it's an acceptable trade-off for sterility. What if it's not a trade-off? David leaned forward. What if eliminating all bacteria removed something you needed? Trell slammed her appendage on the table. Speculation. Fear-mongering. You're trying to make us doubt our own progress. I'm trying to show you there's more than one path to safety, David said. Give me 24 hours. Let me prove that controlled bacterial cultivation isn't contamination. It's cooperation. The committee chairman consulted with the others in their various languages. Finally, he spoke. You have until the next station rotation. But the human delegation remains under medical quarantine. If you cannot provide convincing evidence, all fermented materials will be incinerated and Earth will be flagged as a biological hazard in our databases. David nodded. Understood. I just need to contact Earth for one shipment. As they left the chamber, Yuki grabbed his arm. What shipment? What are you planning? David smiled. I'm going to show them what happens when humans and bacteria work together for long enough. I'm going to show them cheese. David stood in the Grand Archive, an amphitheater of knowledge where species shared discoveries across the stars. Curved walls displayed information in 1,000 languages. Holographic interfaces floated everywhere, accessible to any being with curiosity and clearance. Word had spread fast. The human defending poison food. The crazy diplomat who wanted aliens to eat mold. Attendance far exceeded his expectations. Scientists, traders, students, even a few journalists filled the seats. Some came to learn. Most came to watch him fail. Trell sat in the front row, her posture radiating smug anticipation. David began without preamble. 10,000 years ago, humans discovered something remarkable. If we left milk in the right conditions, it changed, thickened, lasted longer, tasted different. He projected images of ancient pottery, residue analysis showing dairy fermentation dating back millennia. We didn't understand bacteria then, didn't have microscopes or genetic sequencing. But we learned through trial and error that some changes were good. Some helped us survive. A young Keltorian scientist raised a hand. You're describing accident-based food production. How did you ensure safety? We didn't at first. People got sick. People died. But over generations, we identified which methods worked, which bacteria were friends and which were enemies. More images filled the displays. Cheese caves in France, kimchi pots in Korea, sourdough bakeries in San Francisco, miso warehouses in Japan. Every human culture, every climate developing their own relationship with fermentation. We learned to control temperature, salt levels, aging time. We created environments where beneficial bacteria thrived and harmful ones couldn't survive. Dr. Neera leaned forward, her four eyes focused intently. But you still experience foodborne illness. Your control methods are imperfect. Yes, David agreed. But perfection isn't always the goal. Resilience is. He changed the display. Human health statistics appeared alongside those of other species. Immune function comparisons, disease resistance rates, recovery times from injuries. Humans exposed to diverse bacteria develop stronger immune responses. Our bodies learn to recognize threats and mount defenses. Species with sterile environments show higher rates of autoimmune conditions because their immune systems attack their own tissue, having no real threats to fight. Murmurs spread through the audience. Several aliens consulted their own medical databases. You're suggesting our health problems stem from eliminating bacteria? A Metherian doctor sounded offended. I'm suggesting there might be a connection worth studying. Trell stood up. This is manipulation. You're using our medical concerns to justify your primitive food practices. I'm using evidence, David countered. Your species eliminated bacteria and gained efficiency. But you also gained new problems. Maybe there's a middle path. You pulled up fermentation chemistry. Complex molecular structures built by bacterial action over time. Compounds that couldn't be synthesized artificially or could only be made at enormous cost. Bacteria create things we can't. They break down proteins into amino acids our bodies absorb more easily. They produce vitamins. They generate flavor compounds so complex that our best chemists can't replicate them. Flavor. Trell made the word sound like an insult. You risk contamination for taste. Not just taste. Culture. Connection. Identity. David showed images of families sharing meals across Earth. Festivals centered around traditional foods. Grandmothers teaching grandchildren recipes passed down through centuries. Food is how we remember where we came from, how we celebrate, how we mourn. Every fermented food carries history. The bacteria in my grandmother's kimchi are descended from bacteria her grandmother used. Living traditions, literally. Silence fell across the archive. Several species shifted uncomfortably. The Palaxian elder who'd spoken earlier looked troubled. We gave that up, she said quietly. When we achieved sterility, we standardized all nutrition. Everyone eats the same synthesized compounds. Optimal nutrition, but nothing more. When did your people last have a feast? David asked gently. She had no answer. David continued, sensing an opening. Humans eat for many reasons. Nutrition, yes, but also joy, comfort, community. Our relationship with bacteria taught us that food could be more than fuel. He projected the human gut microbiome. Trillions of bacteria visualized in stunning detail. These organisms aren't passengers. They're partners. They produce serotonin that affects our mood. They communicate with our nervous system. They're so integrated into our biology that we can't separate human from microbe anymore. We're ecosystems, not individuals. Dr. Nira was frantically taking notes. Other scientists pulled up their own research, cross-referencing David's claims. This explains the neurological anomalies we've observed in humans, Nira said. We thought your brain chemistry was simply alien. But if bacteria influence neurotransmitter production, everything is connected, David confirmed. That's what we've learned from 10,000 years of fermentation. Life doesn't exist in isolation. It builds relationships. Trell's mandibles clicked sharply. Beautiful philosophy. Now explain how you justify deliberately consuming mold. The room went quiet again. This was the moment David had been building toward. Because, he said, meeting Trell's gaze, that mold creates something extraordinary. Something none of your synthesized foods can match. Something worth the careful, controlled cultivation we've perfected over centuries. He checked his tablet. The Earth transport had docked an hour ago. His shipment was cleared through initial scans, held in containment as promised. Tomorrow, I'll show you. I'll demonstrate why humans chose partnership with bacteria over the sterile efficiency you've achieved. Why we believe diversity, even microbial diversity, makes us stronger. More delays, Trell said. More excuses. More evidence, David corrected. Give me one more day. Let me prove that what you fear, we've mastered. That what you call contamination, we call collaboration. The session ended with more questions than answers. But David noticed something as the crowd dispersed. They were talking, debating, questioning their own certainty. Dr. Nira approached him as the hall emptied. This shipment you're waiting for. What is it? David smiled. Cheese. Dozens of varieties. Each one a masterpiece of bacterial cultivation. Each one proof that humans and microbes can create beauty together. Nira's eyes widened all four at once. You're going to ask them to eat intentionally molded dairy products. I'm going to invite them to experience art, David said. Art that took thousands of years and trillions of bacteria to perfect. The central concourse had transformed overnight. Crowd barriers formed a large circle. Atmospheric containment fields shimmered at the edges, ready to prevent any contamination from spreading. Medical scanners pointed inward from every angle. David stood at the center, aware of hundreds of eyes watching his every move. The temperature-controlled containers sat before him, wrapped in additional containment protocols. Through the transparent shielding, he could see the cheese wheels, the wrapped wedges, the carefully packed samples he'd requested from Earth. Trell stood at the barrier's edge with the health committee. This is your last chance, human. Show us why we should allow bacterial contamination in galactic trade. David opened the container slowly. Climate-controlled air escaped, carrying scents that made nearby aliens step back. He heard translation devices struggling to describe smells that most species had never encountered. He lifted out the first wheel. Aged Parmesan. Its rind hard and golden. 12 months of bacterial cultivation crystallized into dense, flavorful cheese. This is Parmigiano Reggiano, David said, his voice amplified across the concourse. Made in the same region of Earth for over 800 years. The recipe hasn't changed. The bacteria haven't changed. Only the hands making it, passing the knowledge from generation to generation. He showed holographic images. Massive copper vats of milk. Cultures added. Curds forming. Wheels aging in temperature-controlled rooms. Each one marked with the date it was made. The bacteria break down milk proteins over months. They create new compounds. Umami. The fifth taste that humans discovered through fermented foods. Biochemistry, Dr. Nira said, studying the molecular analysis on her scanner. The bacterial action produces glutamate, similar to synthesized flavor enhancers, but the spectrum is far more complex. David cut into the Parmesan. The cheese fractured along crystalline lines, showing its aged texture. He held up a piece, letting station sensors analyze it. Completely safe for human consumption. No harmful bacteria detected. The aging process and salt content create an environment where only specific beneficial organisms survive. Several aliens consulted their own devices, confirming his readings. Next, he unwrapped a wheel of brie. The white, fuzzy rind made several audience members gasp. Penicillium candidum, David explained. a mold we cultivate deliberately. It grows on the surface, breaking down the cheese from the outside in. The result is a soft, creamy texture that's impossible to create any other way. You eat the mold? Someone asked, horrified. The mold is what makes it brie. Remove it, and you have bland, unaged cheese. He cut a wedge, showing the creamy interior. This represents weeks of careful cultivation. Temperature control. Humidity management. We didn't stumble onto this. We engineered it. Then came the blue cheeses. Roquefort, Gorgonzola, Stilton. Their blue-green veins clearly visible. Trell pointed accusingly. That is obviously diseased. That is Penicillium roqueforti. Injected into the cheese during production. It grows along natural cracks in the cheese, creating these patterns. David projected microscopic images showing the mold structure. This is intentional. This is controlled. This is art. A young Palaxian in the crowd spoke up. But why? Why would you do this? David smiled. Let me show you. He prepared tiny samples, smaller than a grain of rice. Medical scanners verified each one. Completely safe. No active bacterial threat. The aging and preparation had rendered them stable. I'm offering these to anyone willing to try. You'll experience something no synthesized food can provide. Complexity, depth, flavors that took months or years to develop. The crowd hesitated. No one moved forward. Then Dr. Nira stepped past the barrier. I'll try it. For science. Yuki provided her with a medical scanner. We'll monitor your biological response. Any adverse reaction, we stop immediately. Nira took the tiniest piece of aged cheddar. 2 years old, sharp and complex. She placed it carefully in her mouth. Her 4 eyes widened. She stood completely still for several seconds. What's wrong? Trell demanded. Nothing is wrong. Nira's voice carried wonder. This is remarkable. She described the experience through her species' scientific framework. Receptor activation patterns, neurological responses, chemical compound detection. But underneath the clinical language, David heard amazement. It tastes like nothing we have. Our synthesized proteins hit basic receptors. This activates pathways I didn't know we possessed. Other scientists moved forward, curiosity overcoming caution. David handed out samples of mild cheese first. Gouda, Monterey Jack, simple cheeses to introduce them to the concept. Then he moved to more complex varieties. The Parmesan, with its crystalline structure and intense umami. Aged Gruyere, sharp cheddar that had matured for years. Each alien who tried them had similar reactions. Surprise, confusion. Then understanding that a Matherian trader tried smoked Gouda and made a sound that translators rendered as overwhelming joy. My people have eaten for efficiency for 3,000 years. I never knew food could feel like this. More aliens crowded forward. David organized them carefully, managing the experience like a sommelier guiding wine tasting. Mild to strong, simple to complex, each sample a teaching moment. The Palaxian elder who'd spoken at the archive stood before him. She looked at the cheese samples, then at David. We gave this up, she said quietly. When we eliminated bacteria, we eliminated cuisine. We gained survival. We lost celebration. She tried to breathe. Tears formed in her eyes. I want to remember this. I want my children to taste this. Trell watched from outside the barrier. Her posture had shifted, less certain, less condemning. David approached her, holding a small piece of triple cream brie. Ambassador, would you like to try? Absolutely not. But David saw her watching the others, saw the conflict in her stance. The galaxy she'd known for her entire life was shifting. Everything she believed about bacterial contamination being absolute evil was challenged by aliens experiencing joy from intentionally molded cheese. The offer stands, David said gently. He turned back to the growing crowd. More aliens approached. More samples distributed. More discoveries made. The station's atmospheric sensors detected complex organic molecules spreading through the air. Cheese aromatics. Compounds that galactic food production had never created because bacteria weren't there to produce them. Doctor Nira stood beside him, furiously taking notes. This changes everything we thought we knew about food chemistry. David smiled. This is just cheese. Wait until you try chocolate, wine, coffee. Every culture on Earth has something unique created through controlled fermentation. The demonstration continued. The barrier that separated human food from galactic acceptance was dissolving, one tiny sample at a time. Dr. Neer's laboratory had become the busiest place on the station. Aliens crowded around analysis equipment, studying cheese samples with scientific intensity usually reserved for discovering new elements. The revelations came quickly, each one challenging decades of galactic food doctrine. Look at this compound profile, Neerus said, projecting molecular structures across the display. Aged Parmesan contains over 400 distinct flavor molecules. Our synthesized proteins average 12. A Keltorian biochemist pulled up comparison data. The bacterial fermentation creates chemical complexity we can't replicate artificially. Or we can, but it requires enormous energy and specialized equipment. These humans just let bacteria do the work over time. David watched from the corner, letting the scientists discover what humanity had known for millennia. Sometimes the best argument was no argument at all, just evidence. Word spread beyond the research wing. More aliens arrived at the station specifically to witness the cheese demonstration. David organized tastings every few hours, carefully managing the experience. He'd learned quickly which species could process dairy and which couldn't, which needed smaller samples, which could jump straight to blue cheese, and which needed to work up to it gradually. The Palaxian trader, whose name translated roughly as river, returned 3 times. On her third visit, she brought her entire crew. I need you to understand something, she told David. My species hasn't had distinct flavors in our food for 42 generations. We read historical texts describing feasts and celebrations, but we thought they were exaggerations. Poetry, not reality. She held up a piece of aged Gouda. This proves they weren't exaggerating. Our ancestors actually experienced this. We lost it. Her crew tried various cheeses, each one responding with visible emotion. One young Palaxian tried sharp cheddar and stood frozen, processing the sensation. It burned slightly, he said, but not like pain, like intensity, like the flavor demands attention. That's the sharpness, David explained. The longer cheese ages, the more intense it becomes. Some humans age cheddar for 10 years or more. 10 years of bacterial cultivation for one meal. For one experience, David corrected. Food isn't just nutrition to us. It's culture, art, history. Dr. Neera approached with new findings. We've analyzed the impact of cheese consumption on various species' biological systems. No adverse effects detected. In fact, several species show improved digestive function after exposure to the bacterial compounds. The probiotics, Yuki said, joining them. Even aged cheese retains beneficial bacteria that can help establish healthy gut flora. We don't have gut flora, Neera pointed out. You could, David said carefully. If you wanted to. Silence fell across the lab. The implications hung heavy in the air. A Metherian doctor who'd been studying the results spoke up. Reintroducing bacteria to our digestive systems would require genetic modification. Reversal of changes made thousands of years ago. Not reversal, Neera said thoughtfully. Evolution. We adapted once to eliminate bacteria. We could adapt again to work with them. That's generations of change, someone protested. Or targeted genetic therapy, the Metherian countered. We have the technology. The question is whether we want to. Debate erupted. Scientists arguing from both sides. Some saw potential. Others saw danger. But they were talking about it, considering it. That alone was progress. David noticed Trell standing in the doorway. The Voskerite ambassador had been watching the tastings from a distance all day, never participating, always observing. Their eyes met. Trell clicked her mandibles and turned away. Later that evening, David organized a special tasting for the original health committee. They demanded proof that fermented foods were safe. He'd given them scientific evidence. Now he wanted to show them the intangible value that he paired cheeses with earth foods that complemented them. figs with blue cheese, apple slices with sharp cheddar, honey drizzled on aged Parmesan. Each combination demonstrated how humans had learned to enhance cheese through careful pairing. "This is excessive," one committee member said, but David noticed they kept trying more samples. Dr. Nira presented her final analysis. Controlled fermentation, as practiced by humans, poses minimal contamination risk. The aging process, salt content, and specific bacterial cultures create stable, safe food products. I recommend establishing new galactic food categories to accommodate this practice. The committee chairman studied the data. This contradicts decades of safety protocols. It expands them, Nira corrected. We based our protocols on the assumption that all bacterial presence equals danger. Humans prove that's not universally true. River stood up from where she'd been observing. "I want to learn this. I want to bring cheese making to my people. We don't have the bacteria," someone pointed out. "Earth can provide starter cultures," David offered. "We've been sharing cheese-making knowledge across human cultures for thousands of years. We can extend that to other species." The committee looked uncertain, interested but cautious. Then the door opened. Trell entered, her movements stiff and formal. "I need to make a statement," she announced. Everyone turned to look at her. "I tried to breathe," Trell said quietly. "In private. An hour ago." Shocked silence. "It was disturbing," she continued. "Everything I believed about food, about safety, about progress was challenged by one small piece of intentionally molded dairy product." She paused, her mandibles working as if struggling with the words. "It was also beautiful, complex, unlike anything I've experienced." She looked directly at David. "I hate that you made me question everything, but I'm grateful for the gift." David smiled and pulled out a wrap package. "Then take this, aged cheddar, for your journey home." Trell accepted it carefully, holding the package like it might bite her. "This doesn't mean I agree with everything you've said. I know, but it means I'm willing to learn." That night, David stood in the observation deck, watching ships come and go from the station. Yuki joined him. "The committee is drafting new food safety categories," she said. "Controlled fermentation will have its own classification. Testing protocols, safety standards, but will be allowed." "We did it. You did it. You convinced them that bacteria could be partners, not just threats." David thought about all the cheese wheels aging back on Earth, about fermentation cultures passed down through families, about humanity's long, complicated relationship with the invisible world. "We reminded them," he said, "that diversity creates strength, even at the microbial level." 6 weeks later, the Galactic Council chamber filled with representatives from 400 species. David sat with the human delegation, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. The cheese demonstration had started something larger than anyone expected. Now came the formal decision. The council chairman called the session to order. "We convene to address Resolution 47 Delta, Amendment of Galactic Food Safety Standards to accommodate controlled bacterial fermentation." Trell stood to present the opposition. Her posture was formal, professional. "For millennia, this council has protected galactic citizens from biological threats. Bacteria cause plagues that killed billions across dozens of worlds. Our current safety standards exist for good reason." She paused, and David noticed something different in her tone. Less absolute certainty, more careful consideration. The humans challenged these standards. They claimed that not all bacterial presence equals danger, that controlled cultivation of specific organisms can create value. Trell activated a display showing the cheese analysis data. "After extensive testing, I cannot dispute their evidence. Properly aged, properly prepared fermented foods pose minimal contamination risk. The bacterial cultures involved are stable, predictable, and manageable." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Trell was supposed to be arguing against the resolution. "However," she continued, "my support for this amendment comes with conditions. Strict testing protocols, quality certifications, regular inspections. If humans wish to share fermented foods across the galaxy, they must meet standards that protect all species." David stood when recognized. "Earth accepts those conditions." We've been regulating cheese production for centuries. We understand the responsibility that comes with bacterial cultivation. Dr. Nira presented the scientific findings. Controlled fermentation created chemical complexity that synthesized foods couldn't match. Several species showed improved digestive function after exposure to cheese cultures. No adverse effects were recorded across hundreds of test subjects. More significantly, Nira added, this discovery has prompted several species to research their own pre-modification food traditions. We're finding that eliminating all bacteria may have cost us more than we gained. A Keltorian historian stood. Our archives contain recipes from before the Great Purge. Fermented vegetables, cultured dairy. We thought these were primitive survival methods. But after tasting human cheese, we recognize them as sophisticated food science. The Mytharians are initiating similar research, another delegate added. Our elders remember stories of traditional foods. We assumed they were myths. Now we wonder what we lost. The Palaxian delegation presented a formal request. River, now officially representing her species trade council, addressed the chamber. We wish to establish cultural exchange with Earth, to learn cheese making, to rediscover our own fermented food traditions. We've optimized nutrition but lost celebration. She held up a piece of aged Gouda David had given her weeks ago. This represents more than food. It represents patience, tradition, the understanding that some valuable things cannot be rushed or synthesized. They must grow. The chairman called for debate. Species after species shared their perspectives. Some remained cautious. Others expressed enthusiasm. A few proposed compromise positions. An elderly Voscarite stood, one of Trell's own people. I was part of the team that engineered bacteria from our biology 9,000 years ago. We saved our species from extinction. But I've been studying the human data, and I believe we may have been too absolute in our solution. He pulled up genetic analysis. We eliminated all bacteria because we couldn't control them with our technology at the time. Humans learned to work with bacteria instead of against them. They developed their own kind of control through understanding, not elimination. Are you suggesting we reintroduce bacteria? Someone asked, shocked. I'm suggesting we study the possibility. Carefully, scientifically. The humans prove it's not an either-or situation. Sterility versus contamination. There's a middle path. The debate continued for hours. David listened, occasionally answering questions, but mostly letting the galaxy work through the implications themselves. Finally, the chairman called for a vote. Resolution 47 Delta. Amendment of Galactic Food Safety Standards to create Category 7 designation for controlled fermentation products. Standards include mandatory testing, certification, and regular inspection. Human fermented foods approved for trade under these protocols. The vote was called. Not unanimous, but clear. The resolution passed. Cheers erupted from the human delegation. Yuki grabbed David's arm, grinning. We did it. But David was watching what happened next. Species approaching each other, discussing collaboration. Scientists exchanging contact information to research ancient food traditions. Traders negotiating for cheese shipments. River approached David after the session. My crew is ready to learn. We want to start a cheese cooperative on our homeworld. Earth will send experts, David promised. Cheese makers who can teach traditional methods. And the bacterial cultures. Starter cultures will be provided. But eventually, you'll develop your own. Each region creates unique bacteria based on local conditions. That's part of the beauty of fermentation. It's never exactly the same twice. Trell appeared beside them. She'd been quiet since the vote. Ambassador, David greeted her. She held out the wrapped cheddar he'd given her weeks ago. I saved it. Let it age longer, as you suggested. Have you tried it? Not yet. She unwrapped the cheese carefully. It had aged well, developing deeper complexity. I thought we could share it. To mark this occasion, David smiled and cut the cheddar into portions. River joined them. Then Dr. Nira. Then others, drawn by curiosity and the scent of aged cheese. They stood in a circle, representatives from different worlds, sharing a food that weeks ago would have been considered biological warfare. To diversity, River said, raising her piece. To symbiosis, Nira added. To the humans, Trell said quietly, who reminded us that strength comes from cooperation, not isolation. Even at the microbial level, they ate together, and David thought about all the cheese aging on Earth, about the fermentation cultures being packaged for shipment to other worlds, about alien cheesemakers who would develop their own traditions, their own relationships with bacteria. The galaxy had spent millennia fleeing from microorganisms, building walls of sterility to protect themselves. Humanity had offered a different path, not fearless coexistence, but careful partnership, understanding that life, in all its microscopic diversity, could be friend as well as foe. Weeks later, David received a message from the first Palaxian Cheese Cooperative. They'd successfully aged their first batch of cheddar using earth cultures and local milk. The cheese was unique, influenced by their world-specific conditions. They were calling it River's Pride, after the trader who'd brought the knowledge home. David smiled and filed a message with dozens of others. Metodians requesting sordo started. Keltorians asking about kimchi fermentation. Voskerites studying ancient brewing techniques. The gift of cheese had become something larger. A reminder that the universe was built on relationships. Between stars, between species, between humans and the invisible partners who'd help them survive and thrive. And sometimes, the most valuable gifts grew slowly, in darkness, wrapped in mold, waiting patiently to be discovered.